As a responsible person with growing concerns for your privacy and personal liberty, you want to know where we're headed and what you can do about it. We ask the experts what you need to do to take prudent and responsible action to safeguard your family's wealth and well-being, and what basic first steps will help you to be aware and prepared. ReluctantPreppers.com.
Welcome back, Reluctant Preppers. We have a very special first-time guest tonight. Jeff Berwick, founder of vigilante.com, is here with us on Reluctant Preppers. Jeff founded Stockhouse.com, Canada's largest financial website, in 1994. He was the CEO and on the board of directors up till 2006. He's now the founder and chief editor of the Dollar Vigilante, which is a free market financial newsletter focused on covering all aspects of the ongoing financial collapse, with information and analyses on investments for safety and for profit during the collapse, including investments in gold, silver, energy, agricultural commodities, and publicly traded stocks. As well, the newsletter covers other aspects, including expatriation, both financially and physically, and news and info on health, safety, and other ways to survive the coming collapse of the U.S. dollar safely and comfortably. Jeff, thank you for joining us here on Reluctant Preppers.
It's my pleasure. I'm reluctantly here as well. I don't want to be doing this either.
It was never
not the show, but preparing for financial collapse and all that.
Understood. It was never any of our first plans. This is definitely a plan B. And you're a fellow who has plans C, D, and E as well. We met in person at the Liberty Mastermind Symposium, both in Dallas and also later in Las Vegas, where you were a panelist on the topic of expatriation. And that's where I met a new term that I had never heard before, PT, or Perpetual Traveler or Prior Taxpayer. And that's the topic we'd like to delve into with your help today. You've been practicing it with your life over the past decade and a half. You've coached and helped many, many others through your Dollar Vigilante newsletter to understand the ins and outs of what the advantages, disadvantages, pitfalls, and the logistics, the step-by-step on how to make that happen. So we'd love for you to just explain to us, because a lot of our listeners, this will be the first time they may have heard of this. A lot of people have heard of expatriates, or people who travel away, live outside the U.S., whether it started out on business and they just decided they liked it so they stayed, or started on vacation, they decided they liked it so they went back, or whatever. But you've taken it to a whole different level. So could you first describe to us just the concept of what is it being a perpetual traveler and prior taxpayer, and what's possible there, and what are the advantages that holds for people?
Sure. The term was actually coined by a person named Harry Schultz in the 1960s. All the way back then, he was already thinking about these things. And, even back then, things weren't terrible, but he was already thinking, okay, they're already bad enough. I want to get out of the system. I don't like these governments knowing what I'm doing. They want my money all the time, taxing me, of course, and things like that. And so he came up with this concept. I actually didn't know about it. I started doing it after I sold my internet company in 2002. Around 2003 or 4, I bought a sailboat and decided to try to sail around the world. I actually ended up sinking in El Salvador, and I just kept going to about 100 different countries, just trying to see what's really going on with my own eyes, because what you see on the mainstream media television programming is not real at all. It's pretty much all just fear porn and all that sort of a thing, and a lot of it's even just totally made up. That's been admitted to by so many people in the media, and even the CIA decades ago said that most of these stuff you see on mainstream media is planted by the government. So you can't believe anything that you see on those things. So I wanted to see with my own eyes. And I realized pretty quickly after that if I left the country that I'm from, I'm actually from Canada originally, and that actually makes it a lot easier to become a PT or prior taxpayer, because once I leave Canada, I'm no longer a resident of Canada. I don't actually have to pay taxes in Canada anymore, so that makes it a lot easier. And actually most people in most countries around the world, they can do that as well. There's really only one country that will tax you no matter where you go. You can leave the U.S. and live somewhere for the rest of your life, and the IRS will still assume that you are their tax slave, and that's Americans. In that way, they're the most financially enslaved people in human history. But there is still actually many, many ways to get around it, even without renouncing your citizenship in the U.S., to at least improve your life dramatically through using offshore structures, through things like if you just live outside of the U.S., you can actually get a tax credit. I believe it's around $90,000 a year per person. So if you're married, that'd be $180,000 a year tax credit. So if you're making less than that, you could essentially not pay taxes just by doing that. But if you want to do it legally, you pretty much have to leave the country that claims to own you. So if you're born in the U.S., you'd have to at least leave to take advantage of some of these things. If you want to do it legally, you can do it illegally, which I have absolutely no problem with. I consider the government to be not a legitimate organization, and they have I consider them to have no true authority over me. And but if you do want to do it legally, you would have to sort of leave the country you're from. And then there's so many other aspects to it once you do that.
Now, in addition to, I'm hearing three main takeaways you're talking about. One is seeing the world as it really is through your own eyes, rather than taking the word of the mainstream media or your government-sponsored and corporate-sponsored media for what's going on outside your borders. Second is being able to travel and but through that to get more liberty and not being subject to as many laws and regulations. And third, avoiding taxation that many people take dispute with in the first place and feel like has gone just spiraled out of control. Are there any other advantages from your standpoint that you see to taking up a life of a perpetual traveler or prior taxpayer? Maybe you could focus on safety. That's an issue a lot of people think about that are listening to our travel and to our channel. They worry about where's going to be a safe location for them, and a lot of people have been told, gee, you got Mexican drug lords over here, and you got all kinds of troubles over there. But what's your take on the comparative safety of being outside the U.S. versus inside?
I think it's way more dangerous to be inside the U.S. I tried not to go there for many years because of that. I get kidnapped almost every time I go to the U.S. It's these guys in blue or black costumes, gang colors, who usually surround me for one reason or another, for doing really nothing, definitely not hurting anybody. So I consider the U.S. to be one of the most dangerous places I know of. How many people do you know that haven't been at least arrested in the U.S.? I know so many Americans, and almost every single one has been arrested at least once. And I don't hang out with really violent people who are going around hurting people or stealing from other people. So they've been arrested for example, one friend of mine, I just remember I was at Freedom Fest a couple of years ago, and he spilled his drink in a club, and he ended up a night in jail. He actually called it a dungeon. He said it was really, really bad. We actually had to find a lawyer to get him out. So this happens all the time in the U.S. So I consider the U.S. to be incredibly dangerous in those terms. It's definitely not safe. And the word safety is such a funny term. None of us are really safe. But at the same time, we can all take protection of ourselves. It takes different levels of things, ways of doing things to be more secure in our rights and our property. And of course, in the U.S., you're being stolen from every single year. Up to 50% of your money is taken every year. So almost everyone in the U.S. is being extorted right now by a criminal mafia. Most people have been kidnapped by that same mafia. So it's so funny for me to hear from Americans that they're scared to leave the U.S. It's like, I'm scared to go there. That place is out of control. And what I found during the travels of going to about 100 different countries, and this was eye-opening to me too, I have to admit, I wasn't completely brainwashed my whole life. I knew that some of the information I was getting was definitely wrong. And that's why I decided to do that trip. And as I did that trip, and I actually had a personal blog, this was about 10 years ago, and I'd write every time, I'm like, this place is nothing like what they say it is, and it's great. And almost every place, I don't remember going to any one particular country that I thought, this is really bad. In fact, most of them I was like, this is great. It's wonderful. There's so many great things here. So much better than the US or Canada in so many ways. So this whole concept of safety, and it's been ingrained in people. Americans have to realize that they've been the victim of a lifetime of brainwashing and propaganda. And don't think of it. Some people may get angry when they hear that. And not actually, when you're getting angry, it's because you actually know it's right, and you're programming is trying to fight it. So if you are actually getting angry right now, take a deep breath, and it's okay. We have all been done that. It was done to me. I thought the world was supposed to be dangerous too. Turns out the most dangerous places were right around where I lived and where I was being extorted from all the time. So this whole concept, and then on the mainstream media, just constant. I was just in the U.S. for the first time in quite a while, and I hadn't really gone for years and years. And I decided to go to Freedom Fest actually last week. And I don't watch television because it's called programming for a reason. I can't believe what's even on it, and I haven't watched it in so long. But being there in Las Vegas, you got all these TV screens around all the time. They've always got something on like CNN. Well, if it's not sports, which I'd much rather be sports, but if it's something like CNN, I can't believe what they're saying. It has no connection to reality. It's like visiting North Korea and seeing how people are inundated with all this propaganda. It's absolutely unbelievable. And it's all this constantly on the screen: fear, terror alert, we're a yellow. We're under attack. They hate us for our freedom and all this kind of stuff. So yeah, America is just so funny to hear that they are worried or scared about leaving the U.S. I'm actually coming in from Mexico right now. I'm actually in the fourth most dangerous city in the world, according to the CIA, which is the biggest terrorist organization in the world. And it is not that dangerous. In fact, if you want to go on YouTube, I just did a video on it. I think it's called Acapulco, Not Even Dangerous. And I just went around town and I just interviewed people. I'm like, well, all the international news and the CIA and all this sort of stuff says this is really a dangerous place. Is it? And everyone's like, no, it's not at all. It's actually almost like paradise. There's problems here, just like any big city, and there is problems in certain parts of the city, just like anywhere, just like the south side of Chicago. I don't know too many people who go, oh, I'm too scared to go to Chicago, because if you actually look, every weekend, 40 to 50 people get shot in Chicago, but it's usually on the south side, right? Mm-hmm. And so people need to realize that. Even I've been to places like Beirut, and a sort of a mentor of mine, Doug Casey, I still remember him saying that he was in Beirut once when there was an actual war going on that was actually in Beirut. But he said it was totally fine as long as you stayed to the nice parts of Beirut. So that was an actual war going on. So this whole concept of safety is bizarre to me at this point. There's definitely nothing to be overly concerned about. Of course, you've got to be careful. I wouldn't be a total idiot I wouldn't come down to Mexico, for example, and try to start up my own cocaine smuggling business. I think you'd probably have a lot of problems. But if you stay in certain areas, and there's so many great areas of Mexico, and I haven't actually been to any really bad ones, including Acapulco. I've lived here for 8 years and never had a problem. In fact, I feel totally safe here because I know so many people in the city. My wife is from here. We know everybody, including everybody. I know the governor. I know, and not that that's a good thing. So I know the top criminal in the area. But that's a kind of a good thing to know, just in case you got a problem, you can call or whatever. We know the top narco lawyer here. No problems. I have absolutely no problems here. So it's all how you do it and what you do. But this concept that if you're going to go to Mexico, it's really dangerous, is unbelievably bizarre to me. It's been proven, it's actually been shown, it's actually safer for Americans to come to Mexico and live than to stay in the U.S. on a percent basis of the amount of people who have problems. It's actually more dangerous to stay in the U.S., depending on where you live, of course, and definitely if you're in a place like Baltimore or whatever, it's definitely way worse. And there's all this propaganda as well, and this is a big thing with Donald Trump is, we have to keep the Mexicans out. Well, the actual facts are, the stats are that there's more Mexicans have been leaving the U.S. over the last 5 years and have been actually going to the U.S. And this is actual stats, actual facts, and I've seen it with my own eyes. I talked to many Mexicans, and they're like, yeah, I used to live in the U.S. And I'm like, why don't you live there anymore? And they're like, well, 2 reasons, almost always the same 2 reasons. They go, first of all, the economy's not very good, and it isn't. Mexico's been booming. So many companies from around the world are moving here. And the second reason is they go, it's just, there's no freedom. They're scared to even get in their car and drive. There's always going to be a pirate on the side of the road. You've got to show him your documents. If he doesn't like your documents, then you're going to be put in a cage. They're not used to that down here. And so many Mexicans are just leaving. So this whole concept that the U.S. has this big problem with too many Mexicans coming there, in actuality, there's a lot of talk here in Mexico. It's kind of funny that they have to do something about the amount of Americans that are coming down here who are living here illegally. So it's you get to see these things once you get outside of just watching what's on CNN.
There's one more aspect that you haven't mentioned that just occurred to me while you were speaking about different lifestyles. was a lot of people on our channel have talked about the lost culture of self-reliance and connectedness to the land and to neighbors and community in the U.S. over the past half century, where back around World War II, people all wanted to have a victory garden, and people had come from agricultural and rural backgrounds. They knew where food came from. They knew how to raise it. They knew how to take care of their, repair their things, take care of their home, their food, and each other in communities, tightly knit communities. But now with suburban bedroom communities and everybody, eating out, the old joke is, I don't say we go out to eat a lot, but when my wife yells supper time, all the kids run to the car. That kind of thing is when the whole culture becomes sort of this millennial culture of dependency on a just-in-time supply chain and the rigidity and the fragility of that, then any disruption in this very elaborate and complex system means people find themselves not only helpless, but isolated because they basically opted out of all those supportive fabric of culture. What do you see in contrast to that in countries like Mexico or others that you visited in terms of, A, people's ability to understand where food comes from and their connectedness to that, and secondly, they're maintaining and not losing that culture of connectedness in communities and to family?
Yeah, that's a really big one, and that's one of the reasons I really like Mexico. About 100 countries I went to, this is one of the best I've ever found, where they have this real sense of community, sense of culture, sense of family, sense of groundedness. Money is not everything here, and that's actually why things get done kind of slow here. I've had so many people, and I'm like, hey, I really need to get this done, and maybe he's a construction guy or something, and he'll say, well, I'm going to the beach with my family, and I'll be like, well, what do you charge? He's like, well, my charge is about $25 a day, and I'll be like, I'll give you $100 if you can just do it just today for me because it's really important. He's like, no, there's no way, and I went up like $1,000. He's like, no, I'm going to the beach with my family. That's way more important than $1,000. So they still have that mindset, a big part down here. And not to say that money's wrong at all. I'm an anarcho-capitalist. I 100% believe that most of the beautiful things that we have in our life today came from free markets, from capitalism, from people wanting to improve their lives. And that's great. I have no problem with that. But what's happened in the U.S. is they've really tried to destroy the family. This has actually been more than a century-long process. Rockefeller started it with the Rockefeller Foundation, trying to get, first of all, getting women to vote. So that was just a small part of it. I'm not saying women shouldn't vote. I'm saying no one should vote. There should be no government. But then they tried to get the women into the workforce. And that's fine. If women do want to work, that's fine. But then they start with the central banking, the Federal Reserve. They make it so hard that both the mother and the father really need to work or they just can't survive. And then what are they going to do with the kids? Well, they put them in the government indoctrination camps, younger and younger. They're talking about 2 or 3 years old now in the U.S. This destroys the family. You really don't even see your family hardly at all because everyone's running, trying to keep up so they can pay their taxes or pay their fines because they drove a little too fast on the way home from work, trying to get home to their family to see them for a few hours. So this has been a process that has been going on for a long time, and in many ways, and then they've really pushed that materialistic culture in the U.S. That is pushed in the U.S. further than anywhere I've ever been. And again, I'm totally all for capitalism. Sell all the products you want, advertise it, that's fine. But they've pushed it so far that everyone in the U.S. is just massively materialistic. That's all that most people seem to care about is just money, and that really is not a healthy way to live, in my opinion. And so you've seen that. So when I came here to Mexico, the people are just so much different. I think almost anyone who's been to Mexico, I've never heard anyone say, I don't really like the Mexican people in general. I've never heard anyone say that because they're generally very warm, they're very kind, they're very giving. I'll give you one example. There was a tropical storm here a couple of years ago. My wife was out of town, and I was here by myself with my son. And it knocked out everything, knocked out the power, knocked out everything. And we were a little bit stranded, but my cell phone was still working. And I was like, I don't know what we're going to do here. Usually if my wife was here, we'd be okay, but I was a little stressed out. I couldn't find where my wife was. And I got a call, and it was a guy who runs a bar that I used to go to quite a bit. And he's like, Jeff, are you okay? I'm like, yeah. Are you okay? And he's like, yeah. And I said, why are you calling? He goes, I wanted to make sure you're okay. I want to let you know I've got a bunch of food in my house. We've got a power generator here. We got all the drinks you want. You're welcome to stay with me until everything comes back on. That's very normal here, whereas I haven't seen that so much. in places like the U.S. Of course, you do see it. Americans in general are quite charitable, but they like mostly to send their money to things like Red Cross, and the Red Cross just steals most of it. Like the time that they sent $1 billion to the Haiti Fund and they built 6 houses. So people are disconnected in that way in the U.S., where they're more connected in places like Mexico. And I'd even take it to other countries. Almost every country is like that. So, for example, I really noticed during the Japanese tsunami, that was crazy. Just watching those videos online, how entire towns are being washed away. No one really panicked. Everyone was just trying to help each other. No one was really screaming too much. It was just a matter of, okay, let's all get through this together. If that happened in the U.S., I'm not sure what would happen. You just see in the U.S., if the EBT cards go off for a few hours, it's a riot. So that's why I prefer a place like this over places like the U.S.
Right, and that's something you just mentioned. I think is critical. Is the idea that what is maintaining social civility? If it becomes in the U.S. sort of they've carved out our underlying historical culture of traditional family and of loyalty to communities and that sort of thing, and instead so much of it has become people living dependent on government subsidies, dependency, then any interruption in the gravy train and you almost immediately can have this breakdown in civility, and you can have these riot type situations, looting, that kind of stuff. But if you live in a country where it's not been uncommon for people to have to make it through hard times, and they've pulled together and they've done that generation after generation as families and as communities. That's the next question I was going to ask you is, have you actually lived through harder than usual times in one of these countries that you visited and seen how people respond to through difficulty, through the pressures that come from an upset?
That's a good question. I guess the worst would have just been that tropical storm here in Mexico, and that went fine. And actually, we raised a lot of money with the anarcho-capitalist community, and it was really interesting to see how everyone came together. Like my wife's brother, who I thought was just a taxi driver, all of a sudden became a doctor. All of a sudden, he pulls up. He's got a surgical mask on. He's like, "We got to get over here. This whole town got wiped out by the river." And he was like, he had hardly anything. He doesn't have a lot of money, and he was just loading everything he had into his truck to bring it over to him. And we got over there, and they were pretty devastated. Everything just got wiped out. A lot of people needed some medical attention. They had no food or water. And as soon as I saw that, I just got, again, I put online, and a lot of people donated, which is great. But down here, they're more like, let's just go out there and do it. And we actually set up a camp, and he was doing low-level minor operations on people and stuff like that. And I said to the people, I said, so where's the government? And they're like, the government? They're not going to come help us. And I was like, so they don't expect that. That's the difference between, I think, Americans, and not just to pick on Americans, by the way, Canadians and a lot of Westerners and people like that, but they really think the government is going to help them. And what have we seen throughout every crisis in the U.S., New Orleans, for example, not to mention that may have been caused on purpose by the U.S. government. But even if it wasn't, even if it was an accident, I guess they shouldn't have even really built that city below the water level, which was another government. Yeah, everything ties back to government all the time. But even if all that was just natural and all just happened, look what happened once the government came to save everyone. Or even just look at, what was that up in New York when they had the hurricane? The same thing, just absolute disaster. The government is not going to help you. And most people in other places know that. So like you said, they have this sense of self-preservation, of taking care of themselves, of independence. They're not waiting for someone to come take care of them. And if someone does come take care of them, it's probably going to be their neighbors or people who live close to them. And they have that sense of community in many places, which I really like. And they just don't have it as much. Although I've seen pockets of it in the U.S. You look at places, see, every time someone has a problem, it's actually kind of good. It's kind of cathartic. So Detroit's been having just a horrible time for many different reasons for decades now. And now you're seeing a lot of people moving in, buying these houses for like $50, and they're all building gardens on their lawn. They're all getting together as a community. You even see one of the biggest private sort of security or policing agencies is up there, Dale Brown of Threat Management, and they're a private police. And it's so much better if you look into him. They actually try to protect people, and they don't try to hurt anybody and all that kind of stuff. So these things kind of happen in these sort of areas and pockets. I think the biggest problem for the U.S. is that they haven't seen a major problem that has occurred massively in the country. You could say 9/11, but that was just one place, and it actually wasn't what they said it was anyway. But it was just mostly in New York that there was a major problem. It wasn't countrywide, but the country itself hasn't seen a hyperinflation, not in modern times, not since the founding of the third central bank, the Federal Reserve. And so I think many people have what they call normalcy bias. And of course, the media and all that is constantly saying this is the best country in the world, we're the richest country in the world, we're the most free country in the world. And people believe that. And because they haven't seen something massively traumatic happen in their lifetimes, they don't think it's ever going to happen. And because of that, if and when it does happen, they're going to be the least prepared, and I don't know exactly what they're going to do when it happens, because it'll just be mass pandemonium, in my opinion.
You even mentioned one thing that I think most people maybe have not experienced if they've not traveled to places like that, but you mentioned about the happiness of the people. Our grown kids now, when they were in high school, went on mission trips to Mexico, and they came back with the most amazed expressions and stories, because they were always exposed in the U.S. to the myth that when you get rich, you'll be happy, and that's what makes people really happy. Lifestyles of the rich and famous. And what they found was the poorest of the poor people that they met there were these joyful children. They said the kids had nothing, and they were beaming and smiling every day, so friendly, and their parents had nothing, and yet they were friendly and that sort of thing. So I think it's
I've seen that everywhere. I've made that comment 100 times because I've been to about 100 countries. The poorer places, that's where the happier people are. And I think it's because, to an extent, owning things, if you have a ton of stuff, that stuff ends up owning you. And I actually, before I went sailing on my boat, I sold everything I had. And then once I sunk my boat, I had nothing but a pair of shorts. It was actually the happiest I'd ever been in my life, right after I sank my boat, because it felt completely free. And one story that you might like, I was in Bulgaria, and I had to get to Istanbul, Turkey, and I missed a bus, so I took a taxi, and the taxi dropped me off on the outskirts of town. I had to walk all the way through Istanbul. I was walking through some of the poorest neighborhoods of Istanbul. In one area, they were playing soccer with a rock. And I was looking at the kids. They were the happiest kids. They were all smiling at me, waving. Money and materialism is definitely not everything. And I think that's where a lot of people have gotten lost. And it's sad because so many people haven't realized, and they keep trying. I personally, I went through that process. When I was younger, I said, I want to be a millionaire by the time I'm 30. And the day I turned 30, I was worth over $100 million. A few years later, I was broke, but that's a whole other story. But what I found through that process was I was definitely no happier. If anything, I was less happy, because it was kind of a scary thing. It's like, okay, everything I thought I'd be happy once I had all this money. Turns out I wasn't. Now what do I do? And then I had to really sort of relearn everything after that point.
If we could turn our attention now to the how-to steps. I mean, for people for whom this has piqued their imagination, kind of opened up a window of their mind and thought, wow, I never even thought it could be like that. What are some sort of basic steps? If you could just kind of take us down a list. I know you've written extensively on this, and you've even got a book about how to do these steps. And you've mentioned that there's different levels that people can go to. So what's like the first level, and what would be some advanced steps after that? But if you could start us right at the beginning, what are the most basic steps if people want to be able to break out of that tax prison and cultural prison that they're in?
I think number one is just to realize that what we're talking about, actually be aware of it. So if you're listening to this show, you're already ahead of the curve. Number two is to let go of all these, what society tells you you're supposed to do. If you talk to so many people in the U.S., they just think, well, you're supposed to go to these government schools until you're 24, which is nuts. Spend a ton of money, go into $100,000 worth of debt for your Bachelor of Arts degree, then go and try and find a job, then work as hard as you can so you can get a mortgage, and that's a French word, mort, means death contract, and then spend the rest of your life paying off that house with the hope that at the very end you can retire and then you'll be happy. No, you should actually do it the opposite and actually just stop at the be happy part. Just let go of all that stuff. And one great way to find out a lot of this stuff, as you might know, is travel. And that's what really opened my eyes. And once you just see how other people can live and how it is possible and what is possible and how it's not scary at all, that's what can really open your eyes. So for a lot of people, for example, if they got kids or if a younger person is listening to this themselves and they're wondering, should I go to university? I highly recommend not. I would recommend, if you're a younger person, to if your parents, for example, were saying, oh, we saved up for your college and we've saved up $20,000 or $30,000, even though that won't pay for anything nowadays. But let's say they did that. I would say to them, why don't you give that to me? Buy me a round-the-world ticket over a 1 or 2 year period, and that would be the best education that anyone could ever get. And so that's really the first sort of a couple steps I would recommend to people who haven't even thought about this before.
And once they've taken those both sort of mental and educational steps, then what are some practical logistical steps that people would normally need to take if they want to make this happen?
Well, it's actually so simple. For example, I brought up Doug Casey earlier. He used to just hop on the back of a train and just go somewhere. There's a book called The Blind Traveler. Highly recommend it to almost anyone. I believe his name was James Holman, and I believe it was the early 1800s. And he was not only blind, but seriously crippled. He had trouble even walking, and he was blind. He actually traveled more than any person in history to that point, and we're talking Columbus, everybody. He just went from place to place. He'd just go, for example, I remember one part he was in Brazil. He got down to the docks. There was a ship leaving to, I don't even remember, Singapore or somewhere, and he just asked if he could go, and maybe he could like clean up do what he could to clean up on the ship or something and return, and they did. You can live that way. You can live very freely. And what I've found, and it sounds a little crazy, is that the world opens up to you when you do things like that. When you let yourself go, when you let yourself go of fear. So many people are so scared just to try something. The biggest fear you should have is not trying. That should be the only fear you should have. And the reason they're scared of it is because they haven't done it before. And that makes a lot of sense. Anytime you do something for the first time, it seems a little scary. But just take my advice and recommendation that as you let go and you just sort of go out and do something, you'll be amazed. The world or the universe, whatever you want to call it, brings things to you. It's like doors open as you walk down the path. Of course, you're going to have bad times as well. That's what life's all about, good and bad times. But you'd be amazed at just how these things happen. So I've seen people plan for like 5 years to expatriate to Mexico. It's like, why don't you just get in your car and leave today? Because I guarantee you, whatever you plan for, it's not going to work out that way. People try to plan things that they don't know anything about, and they'll look it up and they'll research it. Just go, because you'll find out with your own eyes what's really going on, and then you can quickly adapt to it, and you'll find that things come to you. You'll be amazed.
Now, you do provide some logistical help, though, to people who need specific documents or advice, that sort of thing. So what are some of those sort of nuts and bolts things that people can look for help and find that there is help available, and they don't have to do this all alone?
Well, we do have something called the Dollar Vigilante newsletter. So if you go to dollarvigilante.com and you subscribe, you get access to a worldwide group of thousands of people who have already done this. So we've got, I believe, well over 100 groups around the world. It's in every continent. It's all over the place. And it's all people like myself that have left their country, that have found a life for themselves somewhere else. And they're, for the most part, libertarian-minded and capitalist-minded. And they've all started businesses somewhere else. And most of them do really well. Not every single one, but most of them do really well. So you can get access to that. We also are actually putting out a book probably in the next month or two. I don't want to give any time frame. I'm so busy, but it's essentially a book on the PT theory. But we actually talk about that regularly in our newsletter, which you get if you sign up for the newsletter. So, for example, in the newsletter coming out probably tomorrow, I'm writing a little bit about details on how to become a permanent traveler. If you have a lot of money, you actually have more money, more problems. That is a lot more difficult, right? So a lot of people will say, oh, I have no money. It's like, well, good, you have nothing to lose. But if people have a lot of money, it actually gets a little more difficult. You have to plan things out to make sure you don't run into problems here or there, and in becoming a second resident or becoming a second, getting a second citizenship somewhere else, which is very difficult. But I would just suggest signing up to that and talking to the people on around those groups. That's why I created those groups. A big reason was because it's about community. It's about knowing other people who have similar like minds and getting to know them. And I've seen so many. There's actually been people get married in the groups. There's been people. I saw someone who ended up owning a hotel in Argentina because of the groups. He went down and he just wanted to help out. And at the end of it, I think he ended up owning it. All these sort of things. And the people in there are really happy to hear from others who really want to do things like this because they know it's exciting. And they also know that you are a resource to them too. So if you want to, let's say they're in Cambodia or something and they've got a small hotel and you say, yeah, I want to know, should I go to Cambodia? And they'll be like, well, yeah, if you want to help with the hotel, and then I can show you, what do you want to do? And he says, oh, I'd like to start a bar. And he's like, oh, I know how to do that. Come down here, that sort of a thing. So that's what I would suggest to people is just check out the newsletter and get into our worldwide groups.
For people who need the very fundamentals, I mean, we've got a lot of questions that people have posed. Here's just a few of them. I'll just throw them up there and you can knock them out of the park. Okay, so first of all, if you make this kind of a choice, how do you ever get to see your family again?
Skype. No, but actually, it's quite amazing the technology we have today. I was walking. I used to have a really, really good friend. We almost talked every day, and I was away, and he was in Vancouver, and I used to live in Vancouver, and I was away from Vancouver for I think 3 or 4 years, and I was back in Vancouver for just a day on a stopover, and so I didn't think to really call anyone. I was just going to go into town, eat some sushi, and then go back to the airport. And I saw him on the street, and we both just sort of nodded and said hi, shook hands, and we both went to walk away. And then for a second, we stopped. We looked back, and we both realized we hadn't seen each other in years, but we've been talking over the internet, Skype, that sort of a thing. The other thing is, too, it's not that hard to travel. So a lot of people here have moved to Mexico. Their family comes and visits them. It's not that hard. We have air travel today. Even if you move to, where's the furthest place from the U.S.? India. You can get there in about 24 hours in one day. Imagine how long that would have taken the blind traveler James Holman to get there, and he's crippled and broke and blind. So yeah, don't even worry about that. Plus, you will find an entirely new group of friends pretty quickly, no matter where you go, because people like that gravitate together. And you'll find in many of these places, you'll just be making a lot of friends so much easier than in other places like the U.S., where it tends to be a little harder to meet people.
And people ask, how do you get your mail?
I haven't gotten postal mail in 20 years. We have the internet now, and there's things like email, and you can do online banking. I don't know if anyone knows this. If you're talking about receiving packages here in Mexico, they have FedEx, UPS, and DHL, and I actually have a guy who smuggles stuff across the border, so I don't have any problems with customs. He's in Texas, so I have Amazon send it to him. He walks it across the border, and then he ships it here. It's here in one day, so that's pretty easy.
How do you hold assets is another thing people worry about, is like if they have accumulated assets, any real things that they want to make sure that they keep their valuables about them. It's kind of a two-edged sword because they don't want to attract undue attention to themselves, but they'd like to know, is it possible to relocate and still keep your valuables safe, that kind of thing.
Yeah, you have to be careful. Like I said, the more you have, the more difficult it gets. But there's so many easy ways. For example, I would highly recommend having a significant portion of your assets in precious metals. That's so easy now to invest in vaults all around the world. There's companies like goldmoney.com, bitgold.com, which I really like. You can just go to dollarvigilante.com/bitgold, and you actually get like a sign up. You get like extra $50 or something if you sign up or something. There's other ones, Bullion Vault I like. There's a few others I like. And you can actually just send money to them, wire money to them from your bank, and say, okay, I want to put some gold in Singapore. They've got vaults in Singapore, London, New York. I wouldn't put it there. Dubai, Hong Kong, Toronto, I believe. So you can very easily internationalize your precious metals that way. If you're talking about bringing a large amount of precious metals with you, I'd be careful. I'd make a trial run first just to make sure you understand how it's all going to work. I would even have a lawyer on hand in whatever country I was going to and make sure you understand the rules and regulations of importing gold and silver. For the most part, countries don't have a big problem with you bringing in precious metals. They don't like it when you leave with them, so you have to be a little bit careful about that. But we actually wrote a full report called Getting Your Gold Out of Dodge, which you can get at goldoutofdodge.com, or you can get it for free if you're a subscriber to our newsletter. So just subscribe and you get that. It's a full report on how to internationalize your precious metals.
How about how do you get along without knowing lots of foreign languages?
Yeah, that's a question a lot of people have. English, we're so lucky. If you're listening to this right now, you speak English. You're so lucky. Every country in the world always has someone who speaks English. Every hotel person, there's always a hotel that they have English. Most of the street signs are in English. It's the easiest of all languages to travel with. So it's sort of funny to hear from people who speak English worried about it. You can pretty much get along in most. I've been to 100 countries. I never had a problem, and I didn't speak Bulgarian. I didn't speak Japanese. I did live in China for a while, and I picked up the language. You can actually pick up the languages very quick. So I spoke Cantonese for a while. Then when I moved to Thailand, I lived there for a couple of years. I spoke decent Thai. Pudai Thai Mai. When I was in different countries, I pick up the language quite quickly. If you're actually open to it and you actually allow yourself to immerse into it, you'll be amazed how quickly you can pick it up. Plus, there's all sorts of resources on the internet. There's actually an incredible app called, I believe it's called Duolingo, and you just learn languages on it. And it's actually like a game. It's almost like playing Pokemon Go, but you don't have to walk around. You just learn a language, and it's mostly free. So all this stuff's out there for free, but people worried about learning the language. It's usually not a massive issue. You can get by anywhere with English, but if you want to get serious, you want to start a business or something, like if you're going to go to Russia and you want to start a business in St. Petersburg, you want to open a restaurant or something, I would definitely learn some Russian, or you're probably going to get ripped off by a lot of people, or at least get to know some people there who know Russian, who you can kind of trust, who you might meet through people like in our groups, and we actually do have a group in St. Petersburg. So, but it's not a massive issue, and you'd be amazed how many people are so happy that they even try to speak their language. If you just learn hello, thank you, goodbye, one more beer please, that's a good one to know, a few others like that, and you just say it, you'd be amazed how the people go, oh, it's so nice, you're trying to learn our language, thank you. It's sort of like the opposite of when you go to the U.S. and someone speaks Spanish and someone goes, speak English. They don't do that anywhere else. They're actually happy you tried and quite warm and welcome about it.
It makes me think twice whenever I think a judging thought in my mind about someone who's got a significant accent while trying to speak English is I always have to remind myself they speak English a lot better than I speak their native language. So,
not to mention, English is one of the hardest languages to learn. It's absolutely brutal compared to Spanish. Is so easy to learn. The sentence structure, the way that all the words are pronounced, how they're spelt. So, for example, if you say in English, I bought some eggs, bought. Bought. If you're actually going to pronounce that, bougd, but in Spanish, every single word is spelled exactly how it's pronounced. So yeah, definitely all those people who kind of get mad that someone's English isn't good enough, try learning their language and then get mad.
How do you avoid tropical diseases?
I don't. I had chikungunya 6 months ago. I got dengue fever 3 months ago. None of them were that bad, though. It was actually much better than getting the flu. All this worry about all these things, I just don't worry about it. I've never really had many problems anywhere. All these people getting all these, I would stay away from most of those vaccines. I think most of that is hype and speculation. You might want to be a little careful. Maybe hepatitis. I don't know. I can't actually say. I don't think I've had any of them, or if I have them, I don't even know I have them. They're usually so overblown how bad they are. I just don't really worry about it, and I've never had a problem. I think the more you worry about these things, the more you somehow track those things to come to you. And I'm being honest about that. I've met some people, they worry, and then it happens to them. And I never worry, and hardly anything happens. And if it happens, like I said, I got dengue. Dengue was nothing. It was a couple days. I just didn't feel good, and that was about it. Chikungunya, couple days, didn't feel good. My joints hurt for a few months afterwards, but nothing bad. It was just kind of, had to, it just kind of hurt when I'd sat too long. I'd have to get up and shake it off a little bit, but that wasn't the end of the world. So yeah, I don't worry about these things. Definitely don't worry about Zika. That's a total hype joke, in my opinion.
How do you understand how to follow the rules to stay on the right side of the law, or in the countries you want to be in? If you want to be peacefully, able to relax and be somewhere without feeling you have to look over your shoulder all the time, how can you find out about what's necessary to do and not do in the countries that you're going to visit?
That's such an American question, because the presumption is that there's a million laws in every country and you have to know them all. Most countries, they might have laws, but they don't really enforce them at all. So all you really need to know is don't hurt anybody, don't steal from anybody. Someone might say, well, what about Singapore? You're not supposed to chew gum. It's like, well, I know people have chewed gum in Singapore. Nothing bad happened to them. I'm sure it is possible. Want to be aware. What I would do is that when I got to a place, just kind of get to know some people and, just ask them, is there anything in particular in this particular country I should know about? For example, I just went to Trinidad and Tobago, and I get off the plane, and they go, your pants are illegal. And I was wearing camouflage shorts. And a camouflage of any sort of clothing with camouflage is highly illegal in Trinidad. So I was just laughing. I'm like, well, how am I supposed to know that? And they went, you know what, just go into the bathroom, turn them inside out, and you're fine. And that's what I did. And, you just work these things out. It's never a big problem.
Well, Jeff, is there anything else that you typically are asked that I have failed to ask you about people who are wanting to find out about this topic?
No, there's so many questions. Everyone's different. So I'm glad you brought up some questions because I don't even know what the questions are until I hear them. But no, just look into doing these things. Sign up to our newsletter. Check out our channel on YouTube, Dollar Vigilante. We talk a lot about this stuff all the time. And yeah, just have no fear and get out there and do it.
I'm sure that you've opened up some thought processes that were not on the radar of many of our listeners, and we really appreciate you bringing that new perspective here. People have got a wide range of options, and one of the things you mentioned was key about overcoming normalcy bias, because so many have just grown up in the region of the country that they're used to, whether it's deep in the big city or whether it's wherever they are, and think that that's the only way it can be. I mean, you mentioned about sort of seizing the day and not just assuming that your life has to follow somebody else's script, but making it your own is a very inspiring thought for all of us. So Jeff Berwick, founder of dollarvigilante.com, thank you so much for being here with us on Reluctant Preppers.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.